Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings just became the highest grossing domestic movie of 2021. And incredibly, that might be terrible news for Disney. Hi everyone, my name's Josh, and I'm here today to talk a little bit more about the intersection between law and entertainment. People really seem to enjoy my video about the lawsuit between Marvel and the estates of several comic writers, including Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, so I thought I would give some perspective about another recent news event and another Marvel lawsuit that I don't think is really being talked about enough. So news dropped on September 26th that Marvel's Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings has earned $196.5 million through its first 3 weeks in the domestic box office. That means it has now out-earned its other MCU companion in Black Widow and Universal's Fast 9. Now, this should be good news, right? Disney and Marvel have another massive hit on their hands, even in a movie-going world that's still ravaged by COVID. Well, not quite. And the reason for that, unfortunately, has everything to do with Scarlett Johansson. But let's back up a bit and go through the history of things when it comes to Scarlett Johansson's lawsuit against Marvel and Disney. Black Widow was originally set to release back in May of 2021 before the coronavirus outbreak changed all of our lives forever. Whole countries shut down, people were forced inside to isolate, and Disney wisely chose to push back their entire slate of theatrical releases, including Marvel movies like Black Widow. We were already supposed to have gotten movies like The Eternals and Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. If COVID-19 had not happened, the next movie that would be scheduled to be released in November 2022 would be Thor: Love and Thunder. We are essentially set back an entire year because of COVID-19. That's crazy. Now, Black Widow in particular was actually delayed 3 separate times. It was pushed from its original release date of May 2020 back to November 2020, then to May 2021, and finally to July 2021, which is the date that it actually released. But before Disney made that final push of Black Widow's release date, they basically decided that they were done pushing their slate of Marvel movies back any further. It made sense, as at that time the COVID-19 pandemic seemed to be somewhat under control, the vaccine was out, people were getting vaccinated, cases were going down. But there's another reason, which is that Marvel's slate of Phase 4 TV shows like WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Loki were all releasing, so Marvel couldn't really afford to push back any of their movies any further because they might risk having things be out of order chronologically, things that were supposed to have already been revealed in some movies coming up in some upcoming TV shows. Basically, Marvel made the decision that we've pushed back as far as we can. We can't do it anymore. But when 2021 rolled around, Disney decided that they would do a hybrid release of both a theatrical release and a digital release of Black Widow, meaning the movie would be available both in theaters traditionally, but also as a digital home purchase through the streaming service Disney+. And as of right now, Black Widow has brought in over $183 million in gross domestic revenue, behind only Shang-Chi. So the problem arose because Scarlett Johansson, the titular Black Widow, had a clause in her contract which guaranteed that her solo film would have a traditional theatrical release. By releasing the film in this hybrid fashion, both digitally and in theaters, she claimed that Disney breached their contract, in part because of some bonuses that she was owed based on the performance of the movie at the box office. Now, this is something that's quite common in the movie industry. Stars will have incentive clauses in their contracts that will base their bonuses on the movie's performance in theaters. They might even get a certain percentage of the box office gross. Johansson's suit alleges that the hybrid release of digital and theatrical impacted the box office numbers, depressing the box office, costing her money. Okay, now this is where I'm going to get into a little bit of speculation because I don't know the particulars of Scarlett Johansson's contract for Black Widow, but if her contract is structured to be based on box office revenue and not digital sales, which seems fairly likely as hers is so far the only Marvel movie that has been released both in theaters and digitally, she has a fairly good case that the digital sales negatively impacted the film's box office numbers, since at least some of the people who bought the movie digitally probably would have gone to theaters to see Black Widow if that was the only option. Okay, so that's the whole Black Widow angle, but what does this have to do with Shang-Chi? Well, if you'll recall, before Shang-Chi was released, there was also a lot of speculation as to whether this movie would get a hybrid release just like Black Widow did. Ultimately, Disney did decide to go with a pure theatrical release for Shang-Chi, despite the fact that COVID was not necessarily trending in the right direction in the United States. It would have been very easy for Disney and Marvel to say, hey, The movie-going environment isn't great in light of the rising cases. It's in a worse place than it was in July. We're going to go with the hybrid model again that worked well to maximize our potential audience. But what is most interesting to me is not just that Disney didn't opt to do this and went with the pure theatrical release, but the fact that prior to the movie's release, Disney CEO Bob Chapek said during an earnings call that the upcoming release of Shang-Chi was going to be, quote, an interesting experiment. Now, many people took this statement as a bit of callous characterization of what should be a very important movie for the representation of Asians in American film. Others said it was Chapek kind of talking about the evolving landscape of media in the wake of the rising COVID-19 pandemic. But there's another thing to think about this experiment comment. Chapek made this comment after Johansson's lawsuit was filed in July, and Shang-Chi was set to be the first major film release and Marvel movie since that lawsuit was filed. It is not inconceivable to me that Chapek and other higher-ups at Disney were watching the performance of Shang-Chi, not just to see how the public's appetite for going back to the movies was, but also in the context of that Black Widow lawsuit. See, based on what we know, it seems very likely that Disney did breach their contract with Johansson. If there was a clause stipulating that her compensation and bonuses were based off the movie's box office performance, not digital revenue, and there was an agreement that Disney would have a pure theatrical release, and then Disney went ahead and had the hybrid release, the breach of contract is not at issue. But what would be very much at issue is how much that decision cost Scarlett Johansson. And that's where Shang-Chi comes in. There is very much a world where, if Shang-Chi performs only slightly better than Black Widow in the box office, Disney holds up these box office numbers as proof to Johansson and to her lawyers that she was not harmed, and if so, only minimally, by the hybrid release. They would say, see, it was all COVID. People didn't go to the box office to see Black Widow because they were afraid of COVID. It's not a matter of the digital sales depressing them. It was the opposite. Digital gave a market to people who wouldn't have gone to the theaters because of COVID. Now, even in that case, Scarlett and her lawyers probably would have disputed factors like comparing the COVID-19 case comparisons to July versus September, vaccination rates, things like ratings, word of mouth impacting the box office favorably for Shang-Chi, but the point remains that Disney would have been able to use the performance, if it was comparable or worse even, to reduce the amount of leverage that Scarlett Johansson had in her lawsuit. But instead, we have the opposite, which is that Scarlett Johansson and her lawyers are going to hold up the box office numbers from Shang-Chi and say, see, it did cost me money. The movie that was a pure theatrical release in the middle of COVID outgrossed mine in just 3 weeks. If you had released Black Widow as a pure theatrical release, as was per my contract, then I would have made much more money from the box office, and I would have been entitled to a higher bonus. Plus, Johansson can point to a bunch of different factors that would be in her favor to indicate that if it was a theatrical only release, Black Widow might have done even better than Shang-Chi. Scarlett Johansson plays Black Widow, a known Avenger who's been in the MCU for a decade. She's a very popular character. She's one of the very few female-driven solo Marvel films. Johansson herself is a bigger name than Shang-Chi star Simu Liu. Plus, that would have been the first Marvel release after a year of people being stuck inside their houses with no movies, concerts, sports, or other entertainment to go out. It would have been the first movie post-Endgame. Johansson could easily argue that people would have been desperate to see the first big Marvel movie after not being able to see anything from Marvel in a year. So at the end of the day, it seems like the Shang-Chi experiment kind of blew up in Disney's face, at least when it comes to Black Widow. I don't expect that this lawsuit is going to ever make it to court, but now that ScarJo's team has this big piece of leverage in Shang-Chi's box office numbers, they can use it against Disney and drive up the price that they would get in a likely settlement out of court. But what do you think? Is Scarlett Johansson entitled to all that money? Do you think Disney should have just gone with the hybrid model when it came to Shang-Chi's release? Do you think Shang-Chi impacted Black Widow at all? Maybe you think I'm full of shit. Leave your opinions down in the comments. I'd love to read them. But that's it for me. As I said in the previous Marvel video, if you do like this sort of content, I definitely will keep doing it. It seemed like there was a good response to the Marvel lawsuit video I did last time. So if you like this and you want to see more, hit the like button. That lets me know that you want to see more content like this, and I'll keep doing it. Until next time, though, I will catch you later. Peace out.